The first sign of town was the wind snagging on a line of prayer flags someone had tied to a fence post. The cloth squares had once been bright, but now they hung limper than old tongues whispering over the grass. Caleb Hart took that as a welcome, or at least as permission to keep writing. He'd been alone for 8 days, the scrubland passing under his gelding like a rough sea. Water was low, coffee was gone, and his hands, scarred and steady, itched for work that wasn't just keeping himself alive. Black Laurel sat in a low basin, a scatter of buildings that pretended not to need one another, a church with peeling white, a false front saloon with a gallows-wide balcony, a blacksmith shop that breathed smoke like a sleeping ox, a general store with windows reflecting nothing but sky. Children ran and then remembered not to run when they saw him. A dog barked once and lost enthusiasm halfway through. It was that kind of place. He tied his horse in the shade beside the store and stood there a heartbeat longer than he needed, letting the stallion lower its head to the trough and drink. Caleb left the rifle in its scabbard. He entered the store with the cautious posture of a man who wanted no trouble and would not back down from it if it came anyway. Inside, the air wore the smell of flour and old plank leather oil, a little peppermint, and the private sweat of a place that had seen too many summers. A boy with freckles bright as spilled sorrel on his cheeks stared at him, then remembered to fetch the shopkeeper. Caleb picked a sack of beans, a paper cylinder of bullets, a plug of coffee that was more ambition than reality. He touched the beans like he might touch a friend's shoulder after a long space of silence. "Long trail?" the shopkeeper asked, not looking at him so much as at the coins that might be coming. He was a thin, anxious man whose lips looked like they'd been pinched by years of apologies. "Long enough," Caleb said. He had the sense of a shadow leaning into the doorway before he heard the voices, 3 at first, then a crowd's murmur rising like heat. It was not the ordinary talk of town. It had that bright, brittle edge he'd heard 100 times, the sound of people making themselves braver than they were by making someone else smaller than they deserved. The boy flinched toward the window. Caleb set the beans down. He didn't rush, but neither did he pretend he hadn't heard. The shopkeeper's eyes flicked to him, pleading for someone else to be the person who stepped out into whatever was happening. That would not be today. Caleb pushed the door with 2 knuckles and let the light cut him into the street. 3 men had taken charge of the space like they owned air. Everyone else took a step back and pretended they had always stood that far away. Between the men stood a girl. No, not a child, but not yet a woman either, her hair bound in a single long braid, dust on her cheeks like somebody had tried to erase fear and only smudged it. She held nothing in her hands, and one of the men had her wrist. Not hard enough to break, just hard enough to say he could. "Caught her slipping bread," said the biggest of the 3. He had a belly that pushed his pistol forward like a brag, and eyes that never learned shame. "Cain don't like thieves." The name meant little to Caleb at first, just a sound shaped like a cliff. But every face on that street changed when it was spoken. Shoulders caved to half-inch mouths closed around words, eyes cut sideways to see who was counting. Who? Barlow Cain, rancher, lender law if you could afford it, and lawless if you couldn't, did not need to be present to be present. The man with the belly, Colvin, someone whispered, drew the short whip from his belt like it was a story he had told before, and never tired of the ending. He raised his arm to begin it again. Caleb stepped forward. It felt less like choosing and more like remembering a promise he had made when he was younger and didn't know what it would cost. "That's enough," Caleb said. His voice carried like a plank set flat. Not a shout, not a dare, a boundary. Colvin's mouth smiled cruel, then slid sideways when it found no audience for the cruelty. The other 2 men, one gray with the narrow eyes of someone who never slept well, the other young, too eager, turned toward Caleb as if grateful to have a target that could swing back. "Move along, stranger," the gray one said. "Cain's rules are simple." Caleb's eyes touched every face and came back to the girl's. She had the fixed look of someone who had chosen not to cry hours ago and was not about to change her mind. "How much is a loaf in this town?" he asked, and it would have been comedy if it weren't so terrible to ask the price of dignity. The shopkeeper was there now, at the edge of the little crowd, knuckles white on his apron. "2 bits," he said automatically, then looked like a man who'd thrown a stick to a dog and realized too late it was a bone. Caleb reached into his pocket and brought out a coin, not because 2 bits would fix anything, but because some men only understood the sound of metal. He flipped it toward the shopkeeper without taking his eyes off Colvin. The coin rang on the plank and rolled into the man's palm the way coins sometimes roll into fate. Paid, Caleb said. Let her go. Colvin lifted the whip higher, not because he meant to use it now, but because he didn't know another move. You don't tell Cain's men. Yes, Caleb said quietly. I do. Today I do. Let her go. A place can hold its breath so long the air hurts. Black Laurel did that then. The young man's hand went to his holster, then stopped there, like it had expected a different ending to the sentence. The gray one watched Caleb the way a hungry animal watches a man who has never missed what he aimed at. Colvin made the only choice left that kept his pride intact. He shoved the girl not hard, but hard enough to pretend he had given her up because he wanted to. A warning, he said to the crowd, as if the whip had been a lecture pointer. Cain's generosity has limits. Generosity. Caleb would remember the word later and find it bitter in his mouth. The girl caught her feet and did not fall. Caleb shifted so she was behind him, not to hide her, but to say which side of him she belonged on. He waited. Sometimes violence leaves because there's nothing in it for it to stay. The three men looked at the faces looking back at them and did not find the worship they required. They stepped away, their boots loud in the hush, and the hush exhaled. The crowd began to dissolve, people going back to the things they had pretended to be doing before they had stopped to watch a life become a lesson. The shopkeeper held the coin like it might burn him. Caleb turned and the girl turned with him. She had the calm you see in hawks on fence posts, wound tight, patient, deciding. You hurt? He asked. She shook her head. Close up, he could see the lines at the corners of her mouth that did not belong on someone so young. No. What's your name? Nayeli, she said, and the sound of it was like water poured from a clay jug. I'm Caleb. She nodded once as if she had suspected that already. I will bring this back, she said, glancing toward the store, meaning the bread he'd paid for, meaning something larger beside it that had no shelf to sit on. No, Caleb said, just eat. He did not wait for thanks. He did not want any. He returned to the store and finished his buying. The boy with freckles moved as if standing close to Caleb would make him a little taller in his own bones. The shopkeeper took the money with hands that trembled less now, which meant something had moved in him that wasn't only fear. Outside, the heat bent the street into waves. Caleb mounted and rode out past the church bell that had not rung for anybody that day, past the blacksmith's hammer, which did not stop for anything smaller than fire, out to the lip of the basin, and then a mile beyond, to where a few cottonwoods guarded a creek that didn't appear on maps because it was honest enough to go dry most summers. He found an old line shack there, 3 walls and a door, a roof that believed in rain, as a rumor more than a fact. He unsaddled, rubbed the gelding down, staked him in the shade, and walked the perimeter because men like Colvin taught you to make habit out of caution. He cooked beans in his black pot and watched them pulse as they boiled. It was almost quiet enough to be peace. At dusk, the world settled into that color between day and night, and he thought of the girl's name again. Nayeli. He did not say it aloud. He didn't need to. Some words stay in the chest like a tucked letter. Trouble would come. It always did, and Cain's sort never lost an opportunity to defend the idea that they were the only weather that mattered. Caleb had made his choice anyway. He lay back on the bunk and let the roof's gaps show him pieces of sky. Coyotes called in the far fold of the land. A moth battered itself dumb against the lantern glass, and then figured out light was a story it could survive without. He slept the way men sleep when they have kept their promise to themselves for one more day. He woke to quiet that wasn't ordinary. The kind of quiet that has been arranged. Footprints in the dust by the door, small bear careful. He didn't reach for the Colt. He stood and stepped out, letting the morning put its cool hand on his face. She was there just beyond the cottonwoods holding a bundle. Nayeli with her braid coiled over one shoulder, with her chin lifted like it had learned how from the wind. She did not look afraid. She looked decided. I found you, she said. Caleb nodded. You did. I owe you a debt, she said, and the word debt rang so differently from the way Cain's men meant it that Caleb felt the day's shape change around them. And I have come to pay what I can. He thought of bread and coins and the uses men made of power until the words wore no edges left. He thought of the crowd that had looked and then looked away. What do you carry? He asked softly. Food, she said, and medicine, and a story, if you will take them. The wind took the prayer flags miles away and made new whispers out of them. Caleb stepped aside from the doorway and let the morning pass between them like a witness. Come in, he said. We'll start with a story. She crossed the threshold like someone entering a church that was not hers but had been left unlocked. The line shack took her in without comment. Inside the room was as spare as a jawbone bunk table peg, with a coat kettle, 3 tin cups, a deck of cards with the queens rubbed nearly faceless, the smell of ash and iron and horse. Nellie set the bundle on the table and untied it with practiced fingers. Out came dried venison, cut thin as paper, a twist of berries so dark they were almost blue-black, a sack of cracked corn, a clutch of leaves wrapped in their own green. Last, she placed a small gourd stopper with a plug of wax. She did not lay these things down like goods to be traded. She arranged them like offerings. "This is chokecherry," she said, touching the berries. "Don't eat too many at once. They will make your mouth pucker into a fist." The leaves yarrow rabbit tobacco and something from my grandmother's tongue that I do not know in your words. For fever. For the kind of cuts that carry the dirt in with them. Her eyes moved to his hands, the scars there, the little white bites of old work. For the past. Caleb looked not at the food, but at the way she stood, feet square, chin level, shoulder set. The day before had not broken her. It had clarified her. He reached for the gourd. "And this, river water," she said, and smiled a little at his raised brow. "But not ordinary. Hold it to your nose." He did. The scent was clean, with a note of something bitter and bright, as if the river had remembered pine needles. "Willow," he guessed. "The bark," she said. "For pain. There is hardly a trouble the willow will not sit beside." "Thank you," Caleb said simply. She tipped her head. "Where I come from, when someone keeps you from being made small, you bring them back the part of you they tried to take. Your hunger. Your living." She paused. "And your voice if you lost it." "You didn't," he said. "No," she admitted, "but the town would have preferred it." He unpacked his own small stores, more habit than necessity, setting coffee and beans alongside her offerings, until the table looked like a treaty. The kettle hissed. He poured water over grounds and let the mud settle. He gave her a tin cup and kept one for himself. They drank in the quiet that lives just after a storm, when both sky and land are deciding what they will be next. "Tell me," Caleb said, and she did. She spoke of the river village beyond the second ridge, where cottonwoods wrote long green lines against the seasons, and women wove baskets that could hold water because they understood patience. She spoke of a winter when the deer had moved east, and the men followed, leaving the old ones to speak with the fire at night, and the girls to learn the stories that do not need antlers to be true. She spoke of her father who had traded words with the agent and came home with paper that promised a school that never arrived and seed that would not sprout. And yesterday Caleb asked not because he did not know, but because he wanted her to have the telling of it. "My brother is small, but made of the same stubborn as our mother," she said, a softness moving through the firm set of her mouth. "He climbed into a cottonwood he could not easily climb out of. He fell not far, but far enough. The breath went strange in him afterward, quick and shallow. I have seen that shape before, like a bird trying to fly inside the ribs. He needed broth, he needed rest, and he needed luck. We had only the first two and not enough of them." Her fingers brushed the table's rough edge. "So I went to the store with a pouch of beads. I meant to trade. I knew better than to take, but the man did not see the beads as worth anything. He saw me as worth less." She stopped. Had she been someone else, tears might have come then. Instead, a small flare lit behind her eyes like the coal you keep for mourning. "You asked the price," she said, almost amused, as if that would make them remember what a loaf is worth in a human day. "Sometimes men need a story told simple," Caleb said. "Bread for coins, right for wrong." "Sometimes," she allowed. Outside, the gelding shook his neck so the bit clicked. A finch came and went in a single breath on the lintel. The creek spoke in a language with more pebbles than verbs. "You should not have to come here," Caleb said, "to pay a debt that wasn't yours." "It is mine," she said, and there was no pride in it, no false humility either. "I choose to make it so. Choice is the only coin the powerful cannot counterfeit." He almost smiled at that. "Who taught you to talk like that?" "My grandmother," she said, "in watching men like Cain make speeches with their fists." She glanced at him. "And you a little. You spoke like someone putting a gate back on its hinges." They ate venison and bread, and the silence between their sentences. After she took the bundle's cloth and shook it outside with a snap, like shooing the last of yesterday into the willows. When she came back, Caleb was kneeling by a small box he had not opened in a while. He lifted out a leather wallet that was more stitching than leather. A photograph of a regiment so faded the men looked like ghosts in dark hats, a medal he had never much liked, and last a little wooden horse, whittled from juniper, no taller than a thumb. "You have a child," she said softly. Hetty answered equally soft. "A boy." His name. He stopped and let the sentence be a place he could stand at the edge of, without stepping off. He and his mother did not survive a fever that moved so fast the doctor arrived only in time to tell me what I already knew. The room held that. She did not reach for him. She did not rush to fill the air with consolation. She did something braver. She let the truth sit and breathe. "I'm sorry," she said at last. "Me too," he said. "I left after. I thought if I kept the trail under me long enough, I could wear a hole in the sorrow and fall through." "Did you?" "Not yet." She nodded. "Then today is a day to make the hole wider." They stepped outside into a noon that had not quite made up its mind to be hot. Naley moved along the creek bank, pointing plants with the certainty of a shepherd counting sheep. "This for stomach," she said, touching a plant that looked like someone had tried to knit the sun. "This for when your friend drinks more than is wise and breaks into his own singing. This for the horse when his joints complain." This she crouched and pressed 2 fingers to a narrow track by the mud. "For knowing who has come to visit without knocking." Caleb joined her crouch. "Coyote," he almost said, but the print was too round for that, the claws less sharp. "Dog," he guessed. "2," she corrected gently, tracing a second print with its twin set slightly out of time. "A pair that belong to somebody who does not belong to this place. The pads are not worn by rock. They came from the flats, not the hills. Men with town boots walked beside them. Yesterday or just before. They were curious about your shack. Cain's men." Caleb said, his voice not surprised. "Or men who think favor is a third kind of weather." "They will come again," she said, straightening. "They do not like to be told no in public. It makes their noses feel the size they truly are." He looked at her, at the braid along her shoulder, at the line of her jaw that would belong to a woman before the season's turn. "You should not be near here when they do." "That is not your decision," she said, but without heat. "I will choose my own distances. I can move faster than anger can think." "Still," he said. "Still," she echoed. And to his surprise, she smiled then, as if admitting a word they could hold between them without taking its teeth. The afternoon passed in work that made sense, mending a strap, stacking a better wall against a wind that had not yet started filling the water bag, and hanging 2 more on the shaded side of the shack. Niley was good with her hands. She squared corners like she meant them to last and tied knots that would not tell secrets later. When she lifted a plank, Caleb saw the ropes in her forearms, the labor that had already been her teacher. He did not say the thing men say when they realize someone small can do much. He did not say you are strong. He treated her as if it were the most obvious fact in the room. Toward evening, a smell came thin on the air. Whiskey and dust, and the sharp metal note of men who cleaned guns, even when they did not need cleaning, as if polishing menace was a hobby. Caleb's head turned a degree. Niley's did too. "Riders," she said. "2," he said. "3," she corrected, and he smiled to have been wrong. They did not scramble. They did not perform fear for the benefit of those who hoped to show it back to them with interest. Caleb stepped inside and slid the rifle from its scabbard, not to brandish, but to lean it casual against the table, where its meaning could be seen without translation. He left the Colt in its place on the peg. Naley gathered the herbs into their bundle again, quick and neat, and tucked it under the bunk. Then she stood by the door, half shadow, half sun, as if the doorway had been cut exactly to her measure. The riders came into view beyond the cottonwoods, 3 men and 2 dogs, as predicted. The dogs ranged first, unsure if this was hunting or theater. The men rode as if they had learned horsemanship from chairs. Dust lifted around them in little uncommitted storms. The lead man wore a straw hat, too new for ranch work. The second had a scar where a mustache might have been if it had not decided to grow in places that refused to agree with one another. The third was young and tense as wire. They drew up 10 yards away, close enough for smell to be a conversation. The dogs sat tongues out, eyes bright, without remembering why. "Evening," the lead man said, though the sun had not yet finished being day. "We heard there's a drifter setting up house in a shack that belongs to the cane spread." Caleb didn't correct the lie. Ownership with men like Cain was a spell they spoke until reality forgot itself. Evening, he said. You heard something and followed it all the way to my door. Cain don't like squatters, the man said. Cain don't like the sound of his own name less than you do, apparently. Nayli said, her voice mild as river water, and the man jerked, surprised to discover the door could talk. His eyes fell too, her lifted fell again. A calculation moved across his face, girl not woman. Brown not white. Ours to dismiss if we wish. He opened his mouth to dismiss her. Caleb said before the man could say, whatever you came to say to me, then listen to what you didn't come to hear. The man blinked, thrown off the step he'd planned to take. His horses shifted under him, reading the body and not liking the chapter. The scarred man spat toward a cottonwood leaf and missed it by a yard. You embarrass some of our friends in town, the lead one said at last. Cain believes in lessons. He thinks you might need one about how things are done here. I believe in lessons too, Caleb said. I think you're about to get one about how they're not. The evening tilted, a single, tight hinge squeaking. In the distance, a hawk rode a slow figure 8 over the creek. Somewhere behind that, a bell rang 1, 2, 3, as if counting how many men had arrived who were not going to have the kind of evening they had expected. We'll be back, the man said finally, which is what men say when they do not have permission from their courage to be present. With more. Bring fewer, Caleb said, just to see if a smile would touch the corner of Nayli's mouth. It did, quick as a wren. They wheel-dusted the creek with their retreat and were gone. The dogs looked back as if apologizing for the company they kept, then trotted after. The light went gold, and then less gold. Crickets set up their small insistence. Caleb leaned his shoulder to the door frame and let a breath he had been holding go about halfway. More will come, Nayli said. Yes, he said. And the town will decide something about itself when they do. She looked at him. And you? I already decided, he said, yesterday. She nodded as if she had expected no other answer. Then tomorrow I will bring my brother. He wants to meet the man who paid for a loaf with his back. Caleb snorted. We can pay with other currency. I have fences to walk and tools stupid enough to break themselves. He will like that, she said. He likes things that can be mended. Night came sure-footed. Caleb lit the lantern. Nayli lit the little fire outside, 2 small suns in agreement. Before she left, she took the willow water and set it back on the table. For sleep, she said. Willow can do that too. No, she said. But knowing somebody has given you something helps. She went a shadow peeling from a wall, then stepped into the starlight and became part of it. Caleb sat on the bunk with the little wooden horse in his palm and felt the old ache not as a wound, but as a room he could walk through without touching every object. Outside, the creek talked. Inside, his heart answered in a language he had not used in some time stay. Morning came like it always does on the prairie. Slow, cautious, turning silver into gold by degrees. Caleb split wood behind the shack, the axe rising and falling with the rhythm of a man who preferred the company of honest labor to the company of his own thoughts. Each thud steadied him, each curl of sap smell drew the night's unease out of his chest. He stopped when he noticed a figure approaching along the tree line. Small measured steps, a lightness that no hired gun carried. Nayli again, and this time she brought someone with her. The boy was thin, no more than 12, with eyes too old for his years, and a limp that came and went depending on his pride. This is Tio, she said simply, my brother. The boy stared at Caleb with the kind of awe boys reserve for rifles and horses. You're the man who stopped them, Tio said, voice almost breaking. Caleb leaned on the axe. I stopped a whip from finding its mark. Nothing more. That's more than anyone else has done, Nayli said quietly, and her words held the weight of a town's silence. The boy wandered to the gelding, stroked its flank with careful fingers. The horse lowered its head, accepting him as if he had been there all along. He likes you, Caleb said. Tio's grin was a flash of sunlight through storm clouds. I like him too. For an hour they worked together, Nayeli gathering herbs, Tio chasing kindling, Caleb mending the broken hinge on the shack door. It felt strangely like family, a shape Caleb had not worn in years. The boy asked endless questions about guns and trails, about the war. Caleb had fought about whether he had ever faced 10 men at once. Caleb answered in pieces, trimming the edges of truth, so the boy could hold it without cutting himself. But peace never stays long where power feels threatened. By midday, dust lifted on the horizon riders. 5 this time. Cain's men did not sneak. They announced themselves like weather, daring you to call them anything but inevitable. Inside, Caleb said. Natalie shook her head. We will not hide. I won't have you in the line of fire. And I won't have you alone. Her voice had iron in it. Before Caleb could argue, the riders drew up, boots thudding as they dismounted. Their leader was a square-shouldered brute with a beard like wire and eyes that had learned to sneer even when the mouth was still. Mr. Hart, he said, spitting Caleb's name as if it were dust. You made a mistake yesterday. Cain don't take kindly to mistakes. Caleb leaned the axe against the wall, wiping sweat from his brow with deliberate calm. What mistake was that, paying for bread? A laugh rippled through the men, but it was thin on shore. The leader scowled. You think you can make a fool out of Cain's men and ride on this land, this town? It runs on fear. And you just took that away. So now we put it back. One of the men lit a bottle flame, flaring against the daylight. Caleb moved without thought, kicking dirt at the man's boots, knocking the bottle from his hand before it could arc toward the shack. It shattered harmless on rock fire, sputtering into smoke. Rifle butts came up, but Caleb's own rifle was already in his hands. He didn't aim at heads, only at the space between them, steady as stone. You throw fire at me, fine, Caleb said, voice low. But you throw fire at children and I'll put you in the ground. Fast. Silence pressed the air tight. The boy Tio stood stiff behind Caleb, fists clenched though his body shook. Naomi placed a hand on her brother's shoulder, her gaze locked on the leader. The man spat again, but his eyes betrayed the hesitation of someone who expected an easy show of dominance, and found instead a line he could not cross. This ain't finished, he growled, retreating to his horse. Cain will come himself next time. They left in a spray of dust, but not before one man turned in the saddle to glare at Caleb with a look that promised a darker night ahead. When they were gone, Caleb lowered the rifle. His pulse still hammered, but his hands were steady. They'll come harder, Naomi said. I know, and the town will have to choose. Caleb looked out over the prairie, endless and unblinking. They'll have to. Fear only lasts until someone stands still long enough to show it's just smoke. Teo spoke, surprising them both. Then we'll stand with you. The boy's voice was small but unshaken. Caleb's chest tightened. He had not asked for allies, least of all children. But here they were, 2 lives already tangled in his fight. That night, as the fire crackled low, Caleb thought of Cain, thought of the rancher's reach, the men he commanded, the way the town bent under his name. He thought of Nayeli's eyes, steady, unafraid, and of Teo's clenched fists. Alone he might have drifted on, but not now. The prairie wind hissed against the shack's walls, carrying the promise of storm. Caleb knew the real fight had only just begun. Word spreads quicker than wind in a prairie town. By the next evening, Black Laurel was alive with whispers. In the saloon, voices rose over whiskey and cards. That drifter's got a death wish. Stood off 5 of Cain's boys with nothing but his rifle steady as a church bell. Won't last. Cain'll grind him to dust. Others spoke lower, with a tone half respect, half hope. Maybe it's about time someone stood. Caleb knew talk was as dangerous as bullets. Rumor could turn a town against you faster than any outlaw could. So when he rode into Black Laurel the following morning for flour and nails, he felt every eye cling to him like burrs on cloth. Some looked away ashamed of their own silence the day of the whipping. Some stared bold, as if daring him to prove he was more than a moment of courage. The saloon doors creaked when he pushed through. Inside, smoke-curled heavy chairs scraped, and the piano player found sudden business with his drink instead of his keys. Cain's men were already there, 6 of them sprawled at tables like wolves pretending to nap. In the center sat Barlow Cain himself. Cain was broad through the chest, his hair slicked, dark as oil, his mustache trimmed sharp as a knife. The room bent around him the way trees bend to a storm. Not from respect, but from fear. Well, Cain drawled, his voice slow like molasses, hiding the taste of iron. If it ain't the man who thinks he's got a bigger spine than the rest of this county. Sit down, stranger. Have a drink. I like to meet the men I'm about to bury. Caleb didn't sit. He stood tall in the middle of the room, letting silence carry his words farther. I'm not here for whiskey. I came to tell you plain you don't own this town, Cain. You don't own its people. The air shifted. Boots stilled. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause its lazy turn. Cain's grin thinned. Big words for a man who drifts wherever the dust blows him. These folks know who feeds them, who keeps their roofs from falling. They know better than to side with a wanderer who'll be gone before spring. Do they? Caleb asked, his voice cutting through. Then let them decide right now. Do you want to live under a whip or do you want to stand on your own feet? The crowd stirred low murmurs rising like sparks in dry grass. Cain slammed his fist on the table, rattling glasses. Enough men, take him outside. Teach him what happens when somebody forgets their place. Two of Cain's brutes rose, hands sliding toward holsters. But before they could move, the saloon door opened again. Nellie stepped inside. Her braid fell over her shoulder, her dress plain, her face unflinching. She was smaller than every man in that room, but her voice carried like a bell. "Don't touch him," she said. Gasps broke out. The crowd froze. No one expected her to speak, much less against Cain. "This man saved me when none of you would," she continued, her eyes sweeping the room. "He stood where every one of you looked away. You call him a fool, a drifter, but it is you who bow your heads to lies. Is this the law you want to whip for the hungry fire, for the poor?" The men hesitated. The crowd leaned forward. Something moved in the room, a crack in fear's armor. Cain's face reddened, his mustache twitching. "You dare?" But his own men shifted uneasily. The people of Black Laurel looked not at him but at her, and at Caleb, who had not backed down. The silence was no longer his weapon. It was theirs. Caleb stepped closer to Cain's table, his voice low, sharp as a blade's edge. "It's over, Cain. You can't scare them anymore. Walk away while you still can." For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Cain's hand twitched near his pistol. The room braced for thunder, but the tide had turned. His men weren't ready to kill for him, not against eyes that finally burned with anger instead of fear. Cain spat into the floor, fury twisting his face. "This ain't over, Hart," he growled. He shoved past his men mounted outside and rode off with dust and curses trailing him. The saloon was silent again, but not the silence of fear. The silence of something waking. Nellie stood tall beside Caleb, and for the first time in years, Caleb felt he was not only fighting to survive, he was fighting for something larger, something worth keeping. The morning after the saloon standoff, Black Laurel woke different. Children played in the street without glancing over their shoulders, and the storekeeper dared to smile when he opened his shutters. Whispers carried not just fear now, but the fragile sound of hope. Caleb Hart sat on the porch of his shack, a whetstone sliding slow along the blade of his knife. The wood around him still bore scars from the bottles of fire that Cain's men had thrown, nights before, black streaks etched into the grain like warnings. But the shack still stood, and so did he. Nellie swept ashes into a bucket, her braids swinging like a banner of defiance. Teo chased a chicken that didn't want catching, his laughter bright against the prairie silence. It felt almost like a home, and that unsettled Caleb more than any of Cain's threats. Homes, in his experience, didn't last. He looked up when riders approached. Not Cain's men this time, but townsfolk. Farmers, the blacksmith, even the timid storekeeper. They rode slow, their hats in their hands, faces weathered not just by sun, but by years of bowing their heads. The oldest among them, a farmer with skin like cracked earth, cleared his throat. "Mr. Hart," he said, "we heard you in the saloon. Folks are talking. We're tired of being scared. We want to stand up too, but we don't know how. We came to ask if you'd lead us." Caleb's jaw tightened. Lead. It was the word he had walked away from years ago, leaving it behind with uniforms and graves. He had sworn never again to carry men's lives in his hands. "You don't need me to lead you," he said slowly. "You need to stand together. Fear only wins when you fight it alone." The blacksmith stepped forward, his broad hands clenched. "Then show us how to stand." Caleb's eyes went to Nellie. She watched him silently, her gaze steady, as if telling him without words that this was the moment. He could drift again, ride out before the storm, or he could stay. He could matter. He sighed, the sound of a man laying down one weight only to pick up another, heavier still. "If Cain comes again, we'll face him. But we'll face him together. No more hiding. No more silence." The men nodded, some with relief, some with new fire in their eyes. They rode back into town to gather others. That night, Caleb sat by the fire while Nayeli sewed a tear in his shirt. "They look to you now," she said softly. "I never asked for it," he muttered. "Sometimes the ones who don't ask are the ones most worthy," she replied. Her words lingered long after the flames dimmed. Caleb thought of the war of men who had followed him then, of how their faces haunted his dreams. He thought of the long years after drifting from town to town with no name except stranger. And now here he was, again standing at the edge of something greater than himself. Days later, Cain returned. The sound of his horses thundered down Black Laurel's main street, a dozen riders kicking up dust thick as smoke. Townsfolk gathered tense but ready. Caleb stood at the front, Natalie at his side, her people watching from the ridges beyond. Barlow Kane dismounted, his sneer as sharp as his pistol. "You think a drifter and a child can undo years of power?" he barked. Caleb's voice was calm, unshaken. "It's not me you're fighting anymore, Kane. It's them." He gestured to the crowd, farmers gripping pitchforks, mothers clutching children, the blacksmith with his hammer raised. Their faces were no longer bent by fear. They stood. For the first time, Kane's laugh rang hollow. "Take them," he roared to his men. "Show them who's in charge." But his men hesitated. They saw the tribe on the ridge, the crowd's fire, the girl's unwavering eyes. They saw that the tide had shifted. And in that heartbeat of hesitation, Kane realized his empire was crumbling. Kane's eyes swept the crowd, searching for the old fear that had always bowed before him. But he found only faces lit with something he could not command. Anger, resolve, the beginning of freedom. He barked again, voice raw. "Do it, draw." His riders shifted in their saddles, hands hovering near pistols, but none moved. The blacksmith's hammer gleamed in the sun. Mothers clutched their children tighter, but did not retreat. On the ridge, Naeli's people stood tall, with bows strung, their silhouettes sharp against the sky. Caleb stepped forward, boots crunching on dry earth. He didn't touch his gun. "They're done fighting for you, Kane. They're done bleeding so you can call yourself king of dust. Walk away." The rancher's face twisted. He had built his life on fear, and now it slipped through his hands like water. "You think you've won? You think these weaklings will stand when the real storm comes? Without me, this town will starve." "No," Caleb said. "Without you, this town will breathe." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then a farmer stepped closer, pitchfork steady. Another man joined him, then a woman with her son on her hip. The line thickened, a wall of people, no longer willing to bend. Kane's mustache twitched, his hand finally closing on his pistol. In the breath before violence, the whole world seemed to stop. Then Caleb's voice cut through, sharp as steel. "Don't." The word held more weight than any bullet. Kane froze, pistol half raised, as if he suddenly saw himself from the outside, a man alone, spitting rage in front of those who had once trembled. His riders looked away. One by one, their hands fell from their guns. Loyalty to Kane had always been fear in disguise, and now that mask was gone. The rancher snarled, tried to speak, but no words came. With a curse, he spat into the dirt, swung into his saddle, and rode off, dust boiling behind him. His men followed, not from devotion, but because they had nowhere else to stand. Silence hung heavy for a long moment. Then the blacksmith lifted his hammer high. A cheer burst from the crowd, weak at first, then stronger, rolling through the town like thunder breaking a drought. Caleb stood still, chest tight, as the sound washed over him. He hadn't wanted this, hadn't sought to lead anyone, but here it was. People had found their courage, and they looked at him as if he had given it to them. Naeli stepped to his side. Her hand brushed his arm, lightly steadying him more than she knew. "It's finished," she said. "No," Caleb murmured, watching the trail of dust where Kane had vanished. "It's just beginning. Men like him don't let go easy, but when he comes back, this town won't bow." Naeli's eyes gleamed in the sunlight, fierce and proud. "Then he won't face you alone. Not anymore." And for the first time in years, Caleb believed her. For days, the town held its breath, waiting for Kane's return. Wagons creaked slower on the road. Children played closer to doorsteps, and men kept rifles propped by the walls at night. But no dust rose from the horizon. No thunder of hooves broke the quiet. Barlow Kane had left, and with him, the shadow that had pressed Black Laurel into silence. Life crept back timidly at first. Neighbors spoke across fences again. The blacksmith laughed loud enough for his hammer to pause. The storekeeper no longer shook when he weighed out flour. Small things, but in them lay the seed of freedom. Caleb sat outside the shack one evening, knife in hand, shaving curls from a block of wood. Not for a tool, not for need, just for the rhythm of shaping something gentle after so much breaking. The curls piled at his boots like coiled shavings of yesterday. Naeli approached her brother, darting ahead to chase fireflies. She watched Caleb's hands for a while before speaking. "You're leaving." He looked up, the prairie sky burning orange behind her. "That was always the way. Drifters don't stay. Trouble follows men like me, and you deserve better than to live under its hoof." "Trouble follows everyone," she said quietly. "The difference is some face it, some hide. You faced it. That makes you different." He set down the carving, a small horse, half-shaped legs, awkward but proud. I've lost too much before by staying. And you've lost just as much by leaving, she answered. Her eyes held his unflinching. You gave this town its voice back. You gave me my life back. Why give yourself nothing? The boy ran up, then thrusting a feather into Caleb's hand as if it were treasure. You should keep it, Tu said, so you don't forget where you belong. Caleb stared at the feather. Light, fragile, yet able to ride storms higher than most men dare dream. He closed his hand around it. Maybe I'll stay a while longer, he said. Nelly's shoulders eased, her lips curving into the smallest, truest smile. Then you'll have to learn our ways. How to listen to the river, how to walk without scaring the deer, how to sit still long enough for stories to find you. I reckon I can learn, he murmured. That night, as stars salted the wide sky, Caleb sat by the fire with them. Teo dozed, curled in a blanket, Nayeli humming a song older than the town itself. The flames flickered on her face, on the carved horse at Caleb's side, on the rifle propped within reach but forgotten for the first time in years. The prairie wind whispered against the walls, but its voice had changed. It no longer called him away. It told him simply, you are not alone. Caleb Hart, once a drifter with no ties, no name worth remembering, had found something stronger than fear, stronger than the road. He had found a home not in a shack, not even in a town, but in the bond between those who chose to stand together. And for the first time since the war, he felt the weight he carried was not just his to bear. It was shared, and therefore it was lighter. He leaned back, eyes on the stars, and let the night settle into him. He had saved a girl once, but in truth, she had saved him too.